Good Thursday, Anona, family and friends. We come to our devotion time today. We are still in Acts, and today we're looking at chapter 15. I'm going to be concentrating on the last part of the chapter, but we have to understand that from the first part of the chapter, in which the Jerusalem Council met together, which was made up of the apostles, many of the believers of that time, many of the ones that had been given responsibility. And the big debate was, should the Gentiles have to follow the same rules as the Jews? Should they follow the dietary laws? Should they be circumcised and so forth? And this was a big debate, as there were many in the one faction that said, oh no, you can't be Christian unless you follow all of these other rules. There was others on the other end that said, no, that is not necessary, because God has shown through the Spirit that all of us are part and welcome of the kingdom of God. And so after much debate, Peter spoke, Paul and Barnabas spoke. James, oftentimes called the brother of Jesus, but who appears to be very important in that church council, spoke, and they decided to agree that it wasn't necessary for the Gentiles to convert completely to Judaism in order to become Christian. And that had been a big thing going on in the church in Antioch. And so they wrote a letter and they sent it up to Antioch. Barnabas and Paul and two other people went, which was a very wise thing for the church to do. Not just to send a letter, but to send, in a sense, emissaries. They sent two leaders from the Jerusalem Council, one called Judas Barsabbas, and the other was Silas. And Silas will become more important as we get into the next chapter. And so they go back to Antioch. The letter is read. Silas and Barsabbas are there for several days. It's a great time of Christian unity. And I think that's a good example for us as we're dealing with different kinds of problems in our church with each other. Sometimes it's not just a good idea to send a text or to send a letter, but to go in person. Be part of that fellowship. Be part of that gathering of people together. Back in my younger days, when I was at the youth camp, one of the things that we counselors were always told was, especially on those first few days when campers were new, go mingle. Get involved with people. Let them get to know you. And be active in what they're doing. And that's a great way for people to begin to feel comfortable and do things together. And that was a point of the early church. Now, the second part of the chapter talks about a disagreement. Barnabas and Paul had gone on the first missionary trip together, and they had taken Barnabas's cousin named John, also called Mark. And Mark had left shortly after they went on the missionary journey, and he did not finish it. Paul and Barnabas are talking about returning to those churches that they had visited before. But Barnabas wanted to take Mark with him, and Paul was adamant that they couldn't take him, that he had deserted them before. So their disagreement was so great that they decided that they would go in different directions. Paul ended up taking Silas, who we had just heard about coming from the Jerusalem Council, and Barnabas took his cousin Mark. Now the rest of Acts is written from Paul's point of view, so we don't know much about what happened with Barnabas and Mark. This Mark is also the one that was considered the writer of the Gospel of Mark. Now, we don't know that for sure. This is another example of what happens in the church when we can't agree on things. Sometimes, rather than continue to work together and be in disagreement with each other about small things, it's best to maybe go our different directions. Paul went one way, Barnabas went back to Cyprus. And so it's a great example of we can do greater work when we're in agreement, and yet we can't always be in an agreement. So let's continue to spread the gospel, but let's do it in our own way. As we look about the things that are happening in our church today and things in the world, we can't always agree on every single issue. We hope that we can continue to get along, but look at what Paul and Barnabas did. They continued their missionary journeys. They continued to reach out. They didn't let that disagreement stop them from doing God's work. And as they went, they raised up new leaders. My hope for you this week is read all of chapter 15. Look and see what it says. Take a minute. When have you had disagreements with others? How is the best way to resolve those disagreements? And sometimes we can't always completely agree, but we can depart in faith with each other that the direction we are going can still make disciples for Jesus. Hope you have a good weekend. Come join us for worship on Sunday, and I'll see you next week.